Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Mr. Minister. And I want to extend on the behalf of Ajay Banga and the U.S.-India Business Council, thank you for your meetings in New York. I want to just say that I think that the meetings across the country have been extraordinarily successful, and your appearance on Charlie Rose last night was fantastic. So congratulations on what we really believed was a shot in the arm for the U.S.-India relationship. Sir, this is a cross-cutting question. All eyes are on Boston right now, and as the former Home Minister, I'm sure you're watching that and those developments very closely. You were in Boston, in fact, I believe, when the bombings took place. And it relates to our relationship and cooperation in security. I hope that we can deepen our defense and our security ties. I think that there is a real bond there between us, and I see a real possibility there for more foreign direct investment and greater collaboration. Sir, this brings me to the question regarding preferential market access. And this is the issue relating to forced localization of electronic goods, in other words, indigenous manufacturing of electronic goods. And we understand that there is a security concern element to this issue. In other words, if we have telecom equipment and computer equipment, how do we know that the integrity of that equipment is safe, not being hacked, that malware is not embedded? And frankly, sir, I would argue that we share here in the United States with India the precise same concern. So my hope would be that we could engage in a high-level dialogue on how to tackle this issue of security together, particularly in light of the fact that we have such closeness on all other defense and security fronts.
Ron, could you phrase it in the form of a question, please?
The question is, as we get into the issue of a policy called preferential market access, which is indigenous manufacturing, we really do believe what you said last night on the Charlie Rose program, which is we want to have market-based incentives attract the manufacturing in India, and not to have it mandated that we manufacture in India. And that is sending concerning signals into industry, and I worry that it's going to result in just the opposite of what we're trying to achieve.
Instead of a speech, could you please pose a question?
And so the question is, sir, how do we square the issue with preferential market access? Can we not work together in high-level dialogue on the security front, and can we not work on a roadmap that will lay out a market-based incentive approach to encourage domestic manufacturing in electronic goods in India? Thank you.
See, no country, is my mic working?
Parent, here, you can have mine.
Can I have this, please?
Yeah, if it'll work. Okay, try this.
No country has become a middle-income country or a rich country without a strong manufacturing base. We have a population of over 1.2 billion. We need goods that are manufactured in India. We have the capacity to build a strong manufacturing base in the way China has built it. Therefore, I don't see anything fundamentally wrong in saying we must have manufacturing in India of those goods that are bought or consumed in India. When the first automobile makers came to India, I was the commerce minister then. What we now call preferential marketing access was called phase manufacturing program. And we insisted that over a period of time, they should produce most parts and accessories of that car in India. I still remember the conversation with the president of Mercedes. He said, how can I make a Mercedes in India? The quality of the Mercedes, the quality of the welding, the quality of the finish, the quality of the paintwork. I said, just try out our workers. He may not be able to weld today as much as you would like him to do, but take him to Germany, train him for 3 to 6 months and bring him back here. What is the position today? India makes Mercedes-Benz cars which are exported back to Germany. So what is wrong in a developing country aspiring to acquire a manufacturing base? I agree with you. Whatever requirement we have for local content must be matched or complemented by market incentives. I was talking to a group of Canadian investors. I won't give the name of his company, a well-known company. He told me, don't give up on your demand that over a period of time you must manufacture in India. He says he has a manufacturing plant in China, and China requires that he make the parts and accessories in China. He says in the US he has a plant, and the requirement of law in the US is a proportion of that goods must be manufactured in US. And all I'm saying is over a period of time, please manufacture it in India. We're not a small market, we're a 1.2 billion and a growing market. Now, you may refer to information technology. That's where this issue has arisen. I have offered in the budget, which I presented a month ago, I've invited people to set up fab facility in India, and I've offered zero customs duty. I entirely agree with you, Ron, that when we require manufacturing to be done in India, partly or wholly, we must match it with sufficient market and economic incentives. But if we offer those economic incentives, why should not manufacturing take place in India? Why should we import those goods in India when we can build a manufacturing base in India? That would be my answer.
Thank you very much. We have a traveling mic. I'm going to take notice of people and then go to the back and line up as there is already done. The gentleman right there was first. Please identify yourself before asking a question and then your question.
Thank you, sir. Raghuveer Goyal, I'm with India Globe in Asia today. Mr. Minister, thank you for the remarks. I must tell you one thing, Mr. Minister. During my questions at the State Department and White House, India-U.S. economic relations, they favors in many ways your budget and also your comments in the past. My question, Mr. Minister, is from India, I got few phone calls that Finance Minister of India is in the U.S. at the World Bank and IMF meetings and ask him that how can he help the common people in India rising high prices in almost everything. This is one question from India, from Indians, sir. My question here is, sir, Mr. Minister, when you said that 250 large projects are stalled, here in this room you might see people representing billionaires or million-dollar companies here. How can they help? And finally, what have you brought, sir, from India as far as this IMF and World Bank meetings? Any message from India, or what are you taking for the Indians back home? Thank you, sir.
I think we leave the last question out. I don't think that's of any interest to anyone here. What I have brought to the IMF, I don't bring anything to the IMF except my presence. On inflation, I've already answered. The main villain for inflation is the fiscal deficit. Once we fix the fiscal deficit, you will see inflation trending down. The second cause of inflation is supply-demand gaps. We have a supply-demand gap in pulses, in oil seeds, in edible oils. So once we look at the supply side and increase production, inflation will trend down. And the third, and the most important, is removing the clogs in the distribution channels. What we produce does not come to the market. What is produced in a farm does not come to a store. 30% of fruit and vegetables in India are wasted, which is one of the reasons why we allowed FDI in multi-brand retail, so that these companies can come and build efficient logistics and transportation chains, so that what is produced in the country comes to the market. And once we increase the supply side, inflation will trend down. So fixing the fiscal deficit, addressing the supply side, improving logistics and distribution, these are the ways in which inflation will come down, and I'm confident inflation will come down.
It's very interesting to hear someone talking about inflation without mentioning monetary policy once. So the RBI is a very independent central bank, apparently. The gentleman at the back mic, and then we have a gentleman in the middle there with the traveling mic.
Barry Wood, RTHK in Hong Kong. Minister, I'd like to ask you about the BRICS Bank. Jim Kim thinks it's a great idea. The IFC thinks it's a great idea. We expected it to be announced in Durban. It wasn't. What are India's objectives for this bank in terms of your $1 trillion of infrastructure plans? Why is it slow in happening? When's it going to happen? Where will it be based? What else has to be worked out?
Well, I can add, I also think it's a great idea. Before Durban, the finance ministers were asked to report whether a BRICS bank was feasible and viable. That was a mandate given to the finance ministers. The finance ministers reported in Durban to the leaders that the BRICS bank was both feasible and viable. So the leaders accepted the report and announced that a BRICS bank will be set up. So I don't think it was anyone's intention to set up the BRICS bank in Durban. It was only a decision to set up the BRICS bank was to be announced in Durban, and it was announced. Now, before we go to Brazil for the next summit, that is 1 year from Durban, we hope to complete our homework. Yesterday, the BRICS finance ministers met in Washington, and we reiterated our commitment to the BRICS Bank, and we have now said that deputies will meet, and we will engage a legal firm. We will draw up the concept paper, flesh it out, and then we will identify the agreements that have to be signed, and all this work will be done in 12 months. Now, this is an ambitious agenda. This is a very aggressive timetable to complete all the preparatory work in 12 months so that the leaders can take an appropriate decision in Brazil. We hope that we can complete our work in 12 months.
My name is Hasmukh Shah from Business Times.
Thank you.
We have, since last 1 week, we have been in contact with business communities both in US and Canada. And your roadshows have been interpreted as very successful in conveying India's message to the global community that India is an ideal investment destination. Compared to these things, I'm referring to the recent statement made by the US Ambassador to India, Nancy Powell, that the Indian government decision-making process is so slow that it does not encourage the investors. But I think your visit to America has made a lot of difference. Would you like to throw some light on how do you balance the thing too?
Well, I don't want to comment on a statement which says decision-making process is slow. Perhaps in her perception it is slow. In my perception it is very slow. But that's not the point. The point is we are working a parliamentary system. We are working a coalition government. In India, decisions cannot be taken by fiat. We can only take decisions in accordance with laws. We'll have to either make a law or make an executive order, place it before Parliament. So these things take time. For example, when I present a budget on the 28th of February, I know it will be passed by the 15th of May. Can you say that of the US budget? But I think each country has its own systems. Each country has its own systems. But I concede decisions can be quicker, which is one of the reasons why we have the Cabinet Committee on Investment. And I've just told you, in 3 meetings, we have cleared $14 billion worth of projects. But I take the criticism in good spirit. I want the decision-making process to be faster.
Great. The gentleman at the back mic, and then we've got 2 here at the front table.
Hi, I'm Andy Martin. I'm from Bloomberg News. Mr. Minister, I understand India is reviewing its investment treaties. I wonder if that's true, first of all, if you could explain why they're doing that, and specifically its current position on investor-state arbitration. Thank you.
Nice tight question. Thank you.
What are exactly the last 3-4 words you use? Position on?
Investor-state arbitration.
Investor
The
state
arbitration clause
Yeah,
in
okay.
investment treaties.
Now that is precisely the reason why we are reviewing our investment treaties. We have 83 bilateral investment protection agreements with different countries of the world. We were forced to put them on hold, put the exercise on hold to enter into more treaties because there were cases where the investors dragged the sovereign into an arbitration process involving purely commercial disputes. There were two concerns. One, in the purely commercial disputes, we have no problem with if partner A sues partner B. We have no problem with that. But to drag the sovereign into that dispute is, according to us, beyond the investment treaty. Point number two, court decisions rendered by courts and disputes which have to be resolved in domestic courts and have been resolved one way or another, a judgment favoring one or judgment favoring the other. Investors have tried to raise disputes in which the judgment of the highest court will become the subject matter of arbitration. Well, that is something which is unacceptable. We cannot make the judgment of the US Supreme Court the subject matter of an arbitration. You cannot make the judgment of an Indian Supreme Court the subject matter of further arbitration. So these are the two concerns. So we need to either modify or ring-fence the disputes in such a manner that the sovereign is not dragged into commercial disputes and court judgments are not made the subject matter of arbitration. Where the sovereign expropriates property, where the sovereign does a discriminatory act, then of course you can sue the sovereign. We have no problem with that. But sovereign cannot be brought into a commercial dispute and court judgments cannot be made the subject matter of arbitration. So until we get this right, we have decided we will not enter into any further BPAs. This afternoon, a little while earlier, I spoke to Secretary Liu. The US has completed its review. The US also put all investment agreements on hold, pending their review. They've completed their review. They have offered to share with us the material and literature that they have been able to collect as part of the review. That literature will be very useful to us in our review. We will complete our review in the next few months. And once we are clear what we want to do and how we want to proceed, we will continue with the process of signing more investment protection agreements.
Excellent, thank you. Gentleman here and then on the other side of the table.
Oh, great, thank you. Minister Jay Collins from Citigroup. Just would be fascinated in a little bit more detail as to what exactly you did to unlock these infrastructure projects. And as you know, so much of the pent-up need for infrastructure around the world is stuck in a whole variety of issues, and you seem to have solved some of them. They can be everything from bureaucracy and intergovernmental decision-making through to PPP laws, the Basel III framework with the banks, and the ability to get long-term financing. Can you tell us a little bit lessons learned as to how you've unlocked these
There are
projects?
four main reasons why projects got stalled. One, land-related issues, land acquisition. Two, environmental clearance. Three, forest clearance. And four, fuel supply, fuel linkages, for power plants especially. These were the four main reasons why projects are stalled. Then there are some small issues. Then there's another category of cases where banks have reached the limit of single exposure, or banks have reached a limit where they cannot lend further. The loan had to be restructured or the consortium had to be expanded. That is another category of cases. Now what we are doing in the Cabinet Committee is take up each case, go to the root of the matter to find out what is stopping the project from going forward. And then here, all the stakeholders, usually it's two ministries which are unable to resolve their differences. And then the cabinet committee renders a decision, and that decision is final. For example, in a power project which has been stalled for many years, the Ministry of Power argued that the power plant must be located at the pit head of a coal mine, and that the life of the power plant was 30 years, and they will dismantle it at the end of 30 years. The Ministry of Coal and Coal India argued that this was a very rich coal mine, and while the power plant can be moved to another place, the coal cannot be moved to another place. So move the power plant and allow us to mine the coal. So after hearing both sides for about an hour and a half, we found that the coal mining had started at one end of that entire belt, which is about 70 miles away, and it would take the coal mining company at the current rate of excavation something like 70 years to come to this place. So we ruled that the power plant will be set up at the pit head. It'll have a life of 30 years. It'll be dismantled at the end of 30 years. And the objections of the coal mining company was overruled. That is the kind of decisions that are being taken to get these projects moving.
Thank you. Gentleman over here. Then we'll go to the back and then to the lady in front here.
Mr. Minister, Mike Delaney, Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. My question concerns India's drive to increase its manufacturing, the share of manufacturing as part of its economy. You point out it's around 16% now. Many would argue that the chief cause for the relatively low level of manufacturing as a share of the economy, perhaps the greatest single factor, lies in India's labor laws. My question is, one, do you agree with that? And two, if you do, are there any thoughts of your government in having a go at labor law reform? Thank you.
I think the concern about labor laws is exaggerated. No more than 7 or 8% of the workforce in India is organized. The 92% is in the unorganized sector. And the laws that we're talking about don't apply to this 92%. If they apply, they are more observed in the breach than in the observance. Now, yes, at the theoretical level, it appears that these are rigid laws and doesn't give enough flexibility to the employer. But at the practical level, at the real life level, companies have found ways and means to lay off workers, to retrench workers. In fact, one of my concerns has been the casualization of labor in organized sector. For example, until say 20 or 25 years ago, the textile industry had one of the most organized labor. Today, the entire spinning segment of the textile industry, and perhaps even the weaving segment of the textile industry, employs casual women labor. The casualization of labor has taken place. I'm not defending it. I'm not saying that's the right way to go. I'm only telling you the reality on the ground. While I do agree that labor laws must become a little more flexible, there is no political consensus today. It'll be very difficult to pass any law in Parliament amending the current labor laws, but that labor laws are an impediment to building a manufacturing base is an exaggeration. It is during this period that we have many leading automobile companies from Japan, Korea, Germany, Europe have come and set up manufacturing facilities in India. India is today one of the largest manufacturers of automobiles, and India is one of the largest exporters of automobiles. So how did this automobile industry come up in the last 15 years if the labor laws were such an impediment?
That's a pretty conclusive answer. Gentleman at the back, then we have Susan, Arvin, Nancy, and we'll get to the other
Thank you. Ernie Prieg, Manufacturers Alliance. Mr. Minister, my question is about a possible U.S.-India free trade agreement. We've accumulated many free trade agreements, including with South Korea. Importantly, in the last couple of months, we've begun negotiation of a comprehensive free trade and investment agreement with Japan, and we're about to begin with the EU. In this context, Mr. Minister, is it in the Indian foreign policy as well as economic interest to negotiate a free trade agreement with the United States? And if not, why not?
Well, I think in the long run, it is in the interest of India to negotiate a free trade agreement with the United States. But all these bilateral and plurilateral agreements are a poor substitute for a rule-based, worldwide, multilateral agreement under the auspices of the WTO. The fact that so many bilateral and plurilateral agreements are being entered is an admission of failure that the WTO has not, I mean, the rules of the WTO do not apply to the whole world. But absent a WTO regime, a non-discriminatory rule-based regime, I suppose countries will enter into free trade agreements. We have entered into free trade agreements or comprehensive economic partnership agreements with a number of countries. I see no reason why we should not enter into one with the United States, although I'm not familiar with how much progress has been made. Some time ago, America insisted that investment protection must be part of the free trade agreement. I think that position has changed now. Since we are separately negotiating a BIT, I think that position has changed. And speaking for myself, I don't see why we should not enter into a free trade agreement with America while we have entered into a free trade agreement with many countries. I think it will happen. But when it will happen, I don't know, because I'm not familiar with the status of the current negotiations.
Thank you. Susan Greenwell with MetLife. Mr. Minister, we're very appreciative of your efforts and leadership of financial reform, including the Insurance Act amendment that would raise the foreign direct investment cap for insurance. Speaking of the parliamentary system and the coalition government, I think you're aware that foreign insurers have been reaching out to opposition party leaders in recent months to try and garner support for the Insurance Act amendment moving through Parliament. Are there other ways in which we can be supportive of your efforts in this critical reform?
No, I'm grateful that the insurance industry has reached out to opposition parties. It was at my suggestion they did so. I said, what is the point of talking only to the government? You must talk to the opposition, like you do in the US. Here you talk to both parties in the Congress. And I hope it has effect. I will know whether it has had an effect when I go back to India in 2 days. Parliament opens on 22nd of April. It is right there, top of the agenda. We are stuck on one clause, FDI cap, whether it should be 26 or raised to 49. If the opposition party, the principal opposition party comes around, the bill will be passed, and I will consult others, the bill will be passed. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I sincerely hope that the efforts of the insurance industry in speaking to the opposition will be helpful, and I can pass the bill.
Mr. Question, Arvind Subramanian. So when you look across, I work for the Peterson Institute and for Nancy at the Center for Global Development. So when you look across countries, there is no correlation between political systems and economic growth. But my question, over the last 1 or 2 years, I've been kind of revising that a little bit in India, because it seems to me that the way democracy has taxed India, at least in the last 10 years, is through fiscal populism. And what seems to be happening in the last 8 months after you came back was the notion gaining that maybe fiscal prudence is also good politics. Do you think that is now spreading in the Indian political system, or is it something that's going to be associated with Mr. Chidambaram only?
Well, I can't speak for the Indian political system, but I can speak for the Congress party. I think the Congress party accepts the position that I have taken. In fact, the correct way to put it is, I have taken the position which reflects the Congress parties. The position is that growth is an imperative. Growth is the first requirement. I said so in my budget speech. I said without growth, we talk about growth leading to inclusive development. Without growth, there will be neither inclusiveness nor development. That's what I said in my speech. Now, that is the policy that is accepted by the Congress party. So as long as the Congress party is at the helm of affairs, I believe that they will accept that growth is necessary, but growth is not sufficient. Growth is necessary in order to lead to inclusive development. Now, once you accept that paradigm, you have to observe fiscal discipline. You have to raise adequate revenues. You have to contain expenditure. You have to balance your books to a large extent. Of course, a developing country can have a small fiscal deficit. You have to contain inflation. All that, I think, follows in the natural course once you accept the premise that growth is necessary, growth is an imperative, and it is only growth that will lead to inclusive development.
Speaking of development.
Yeah. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Arvind, too. I'm Nancy Birdsall, the Center for Global Development. I think, Mr. Minister, you've been wonderfully clear and straightforward, including on this issue of growth and fiscal prudence are, in your mind, in part, a matter of delivering development for, say, the bottom half of your population in terms of income. And it's clear that, you have other ministers and other parts of government that are concerned fundamentally with social policy. But because you raised the issue of implementation, and then you went to examples that you can manage at the central level, I just thought to ask you, because implementation is such a constraint, a problem, not expenditures, but implementation on delivery of social services, protection of the poor, social insurance, and so on. Could you say something about the vision in the party and in the coalition government about how, at the federal level, the state and local governments can be perhaps given incentives to deal better with their implementation problems?
Actually, more and more states are coming around to the view that implementation is the key. Until about 10 years ago, most governments were not re-elected. If you were in office for 5 years, you are more or less certain to be defeated in the next election. That seems to have changed in India over the last 10 years. Incumbent governments are getting re-elected. The government in the center got re-elected in 2009 with a larger number. We went to election with 145 seats. We came back with 206 seats, 61 seats more. Since then, governments have been re-elected in Gujarat, in Madhya Pradesh, in Tripura, in Nagaland, in Assam, in Mizoram, Meghalaya, Odisha. So I think this has whetted the appetite of political leaders and political parties that perhaps defeat is not inevitable. Perhaps you can get re-elected for the second time and a third time. And then if you look at it closely, governments which are seen to have delivered are the governments that are re-elected. It's a perception that this is a government which has delivered or made a sincere attempt to deliver on 10 items and has delivered on 5 or 6, they seem to get re-elected. So I think this fever of implementation seems to have caught on with more and more state governments. And that is, I think, a very welcome sign. So I think once you bring the state government on board and say, listen, let's get together to implement this project. I think it's happening. For example, the metros. Following the example of Delhi Metro, today there's fierce competition for a metro in every state capital. We have a metro being built in Mumbai, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Chennai, and Kochi, and a couple of other capitals. So there's competition to get a metro done because people who travel to Delhi and travel in the Delhi Metro say this is world class and why are we not having it in our state capital? Likewise, the 4-lane highways, which are tolled. Now, once people start traveling in some of those highways, they are asking the question, why is my city not connected with the other city by the similar highway? There's a competition now for these 4-lane tolled highways, and people are willing to pay tolls, when even 10 years ago, I would have been scoffed at if I said people will be willing to pay tolls. So I think implementation fever is catching on. What we need to do is find ways and means to get rid of bureaucratic and other obstacles, policy obstacles and bureaucratic obstacles to implementation.
That's a great note on which to end. Now, I'm afraid we're at the end of our time. Thank you all. I noticed not a single person stirred. You were fascinating as always, and we'll look forward to welcoming you back. Whatever happens in the next election, we will look forward to welcoming you back for a report on implementation, energy, the new India, and perhaps the US-India Free Trade Agreement that our group is going to design for you. So thank you very much.